achieve. I hope you didn't mind.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good break. Welcome, Bill Fountain, for being with us today. Dr. Bill Fountain joins us from the University of Kentucky, Department of Horticulture. He is a tree risk assessment qualified instructor and an instructor for the ISA's Tree and Plant Appraisal Qualification. He's an ISA board certified master arborist and a registered consulting arborist. Though he's not from Ohio, as you will notice from his accent, he has strong Ohio roots here with 7 grandchildren in the Buckeye State and his wife Cindy, who is also a native Buckeye. Bill is also owned by 2 dogs with names after trees. One, a Sheltie named Willow, and a Nova Scotia duck tolling retriever named Sassafras. So thanks for being with us today, Bill. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Ann. And Ann was laughing at me a little bit about the dog names. And you know, I have to tell you a story. I got home last night, and everybody, male and female, knows that when they walk into the house and their spouse says, "Do you know what your son or what your daughter did today?" they are in trouble. The child as well as you. Well, I walked in yesterday and my wife said, "Do you know what your dog did today?" And it became my dog, you know, solely my dog, and it was the toller, and she had eaten a whole stick of butter. So you know, that was another trial for that toller. Anyway, thank you very much, Ann. I appreciate your having me on this session, and this is a real pleasure today to be with you on this and to be able to talk about one of my favorite programs, the Tree Risk Assessment Program, and as well as some of the other credentials that are open to municipalities. The TPAC program, the Tree and Plant Appraisal Program, is actually maintained and is managed by the Tree and Plant Appraisal you know, credentialing committee, and is managed by the program. The training program is managed by the ASCA, American Society of Consulting Arborists. So as we talk about this today, we're talking about municipalities, and when I use the word municipalities, I'm really talking about every one of us. These are not just the people who are city arborists or municipal arborists. They're the people that work for the state, the people who work for the federal government, as well as all of us who occasionally work on public you know, maintain trees. So as we look at this, we look into our crystal ball, and intuitively we know that all of these appraisal, all of the credentials that we're going to be talking about are valuable, but how valuable are they? How valuable are they to the people that we're serving? They're great because they are a mark of a personal achievement. So Ann mentioned that I was a board certified master arborist, and I was very, very proud to be able to get that achievement, and that was one of my little you know, achievements in professional improvement. As acceptance to the public. This is one of the real things that we'll be talking about on these different credentials. And as we look at these, a credential is a documentation that shows that a person is perceived to be competent and has the authority to do something. In this case, to work on trees, to give advice for trees. Al Shigo had a great quote that I've used many, many times, and that was, people who do not dissect trees, who do not work on trees, should not be allowed to talk about them. So in dealing with trees, I have you know, used my chainsaw periodically to section trees in ways that they were really not meant to be sectioned, but trying to do that carefully. The credentials that we'll be talking about are going to be offered by some third party. This may be the International Society of Arboriculture, ASCA, American Society of Consulting Arborists, the Ohio State University, and all of these institutions are assumed to have a relevance to the area that they're being evaluated on. Now, as we look at these credentials, they come under a number of different names. We've got degrees, we've got certifications, we've got qualifications, certificates, and licensure. And I'm going to briefly define all of these before we actually move into the qualifications, such as the TRAQ program. And as we look at the degrees, these are oftentimes conferred by an educational institution. And they are presumed that the student coming out of this educational institution has attained a certain level of knowledge. They have passed a certain number of courses that were all prerequisites for getting the degree. We have certifications. I liken a certification to being very much like a final exam. It tests on a body of knowledge. So a good final exam question will take information A that was presented by the instructor and information B that was presented by the instructor and pull those together and actually get the student to come up with an example or an answer that would be relevant to pulling these two bits of knowledge together. In other words, to be able to think. The downside of a certification written exam is that this is oftentimes difficult for people who have been out of a classroom for a long period of time, people who may have some type of a learning disability, and dyslexia is one of these. It's very prevalent in our profession. And somebody that may have test anxiety, which does not mean that they don't know the material, they're just nervous. So with certifications, CEUs are oftentimes required, and people mumble and grumble over the CEUs. I've got 2 more months before my renewal comes due. I need 5 CEUs. Where can I get them quick and preferably cheap? So these CEUs were actually built into the certification program so that they would keep you, the provider of services, up to date. Our Certified Arborist program is an example of that, and is one of the things that we require for that. There are a few extra CEUs that are required for the BCMA program. Now, a qualification is a little different than a certification. This is a little more of a British model rather than American and Canadian model. So a qualification, the instructor teaches you how to do a task and then tests you on your ability to perform that task. Generally, with the qualification, there are no CEUs to be obtained in the time period that qualification is valid, but you do then have to go back and re-qualify, generally every 5 years for the arborist for the TRAQ program. And in that 5-year period, we have already gone completely through one 5-year period, and we're approaching the end of the second 5-year period for the TRAQ program. And what we have found out is the science of risk management has changed. It has grown. It's developed. It's refined itself, as has our tree risk assessment qualification. So you have to go back, you have to take a short refresher course. We cover information in that course that is just 1 day or a half a day of instruction long, and it brings you up to date on what has changed in the previous 5 years. The same will be held true for the TPAC program, where we look at plant appraisal. That's going to be in on that. Then we have a certificate. One of the real emphasis in our society now is on diversity and appreciation for diversity, for tolerance. And so a certificate program is oftentimes where we, the individual employed in a company or in a university, we have to go through that diversity training. I consider myself to be a very liberal person and very accepting, somebody that grabs diversity and really appreciates diversity, particularly in a classroom. And so I'm a little bit insulted, or I feel that deep down, that at times when I have to go through this diversity tolerance training. But this is something that the educational institution, the company, needs to do to show that they have done their due diligence. Due diligence is a term that we'll define a little bit later on in this presentation. So it shows that there is a comprehension, that you've been there, you've been exposed to this information on this particular topic. Now, in addition to degrees and certificates and qualifications and a certificate that you have attended a session, we have licensure. Now, neither Ohio nor Kentucky has a licensure program at this point in time for arborists. Maybe we should, and it's something that Kentucky is looking at right now. But it's a right that's granted to the state. Perhaps if you reached into your back pocket, you would pull out your wallet and you would have a driver's license in there. This is a license that allows you to drive a vehicle of any type in your state, and it has reciprocity in all of the other states. So this is oftentimes managed with licensure for a profession is managed by an NGO, non-governmental organization. This would be something like ASCA or ISA, or maybe your local chapter of ISA. And it is required for many types of work. So if you hire a plumber in, or if you hire an electrician to come in and do work in your house, they should have a license that's offered by the state to do their particular type of work. CEUs are generally required, and an update may be required also for this particular licensure to hold true. So as we look at our qualification, the tree risk assessment qualification. Risk is defined by risk managers as the likelihood of something happening times the consequences. And this is one of the things that we really stress. The likelihood that something is going to happen times the consequences. So here we see a tree. We all notice the bifurcation in there. We've got a strong codominant on the right-hand side, and we would be worried about somebody passing through the circle on the sidewalk at the exact moment that this bifurcation breaks loose and this large branch falls down. If it hits them, the consequences are going to be very, very dire. The consequences could even result in a loss of life. But the likelihood of somebody walking by at that exact instance, when it's most likely to fail being in a storm, is very, very low. But the consequences are so dire that we would want to do something to take care of this bifurcation and reduce the risk. An example of this would be driving in an automobile, something we all do. So this is one of the most dangerous things that we do as Americans if we're not working in felling a tree. But an automobile crash is very, very unlikely to happen. It doesn't happen very many times in our lifetime, or hopefully it doesn't happen very many times. But an automobile crash at 70 miles an hour could have very, very dire consequences. It could result in a severe injury or even death. And so as a result of that, the states have all required a seatbelt law to go into effect. And these are mandated by the federal government. You must have your seatbelt on if you're driving in an automobile, and your passengers must be likely secured. Not that they anticipate that you're going to have an accident, but just in case to prevent that dire consequences. This was a tree that I was driving down the road that you see in the background, and I looked at it, and like all of you, it immediately caught my eye, and I said, OMG, this is one of those OMG trees. Look at that thing. So the likelihood of failure of this particular tree is quite high. There's really not much holding it up, but the likelihood of striking a target is very, very low. But the consequences, if that did hit an individual being a target, would be very, very severe. So as we begin to assess this, we look at this. What is the target? It's in the middle of a 5-acre front yard. There are no walkways. There are no driveways nearby where this tree is likely to fall. So the occupancy rate would be for the owner, and probably just while they're mowing their grass. They would probably spend less than a minute per week for 8 months out of the year, the 8 months being the time that the grass is going to be growing. And it would they would probably not be out there at a time period when the storms were actually engaging and pushing on the tree, but perhaps maybe on a windy day in March. And so if you multiply this out 1 minute per week times 8 months, you end up with about 32 minutes per year, or a 1 chance in 16,000 of this particular tree falling and hitting the poor owner while he's actually mowing. So this would have a low risk rating. Not that the consequences were low, not that the likelihood of failure was low, but because of the occupancy rate. Now, occupancy rate is one of the things that we most oftentimes fail in, or we oftentimes would come up short in our prediction. We overestimate, as arborists, we overestimate the occupancy rate of an individual being in that time. And that is personal experience with watching a lot of students, hundreds of students, go through TRAQ courses that I have worked with. So again, arborists predict the likelihood of failure, the likelihood that it would strike the target, and the consequences. So here is a tree. Now this is not in the United States. This was in another country that I have worked in. But the tree fell. It killed a young man pictured in his cap and gown, and it killed him instantly. He never knew what hit him. But it left a woman without a husband and a 2-year-old child without a father. And so the occupancy rate of this particular roadway was fairly high. For the individual passing through, it was bad luck. He happened to be the individual that the tree fell and hit, and it did fall in the middle of a storm. We're not afraid as human beings to drive in a storm. You may be a little more nervous about driving in a storm. You may be a little more cautious about somebody sliding into you or you sliding into something else. But we typically don't worry about being out in the trees. And yet, one of the messages that we need to get across to the public is you don't need to be so concerned about the tree and the lawn. Statistically, if you are going to be killed by a tree, the most likely place that you would be killed would be in your automobile and generally in a storm. The situations where I have had to act as an expert witness where somebody has been killed by a tree has almost always been somebody driving or a passenger in an automobile. And so this is one of the things that we need to look at. And this is what we're really driving at in the TRAQ program for tree risk assessment, is looking at these municipal owned or municipal managed trees out there in the storms and the likelihood of failure. And it becomes a very important task that we have of taking care of this. So for the municipal arborist and all of the other individuals working either on a private estate or working in some other area where people would be, we have a duty of care to inspect these right-of-ways, to anticipate where people are going to be, to manage these trees, and to get rid of the ones that pose an extreme risk to the public. Now, what is an extreme risk to the public? How much of a risk? There's risk in everything that we do, but risk should be defined by the municipality. It should be defined by the state, and that risk ratings on trees in our public parks, trees with an extreme risk rating, trees with a high risk rating would not be tolerated. We might tolerate those in a remote part of the landscape where people are not usually going to be there. We may tolerate a high risk rating on a trail where people don't use that trail very much. So to the arborist, getting these credentials, the TRAQ program in particular, it gives you a personal satisfaction. Yes, I did it. I am now a tree risk assessment qualified individual. It should be part of the professional development of individuals who work for a company, who work for a municipality. Is a good recognition by your peers. Maybe they ought to be taking you out on a Friday afternoon and buying you the beer that you've been thinking about all day long. So it also adds a credibility to the public. Now, one of the questions is, what is the real value of this to the municipality? Or does having a TRAQ qualified individuals on our staff, does that really increase our liability? And this is a question that you may get from the county attorney or the city attorney or one of the attorneys for the state. I've certainly been asked that many times before. And the answer to that is going to be that in order to do this, we have to have people that have had appropriate training. Now, Roy talked last time about safety and was really zeroing in on safety of the crew of that. But we're talking in this particular session really about safety to the population. Now, here is a faded copy of the Constitution, and in paraphrasing the introduction to this, the role of government is defined right at the beginning of our Constitution. You may have not studied this since you were in high school, but it's to form a more perfect union. It's to establish justice. It's to ensure domestic tranquility. It's to provide for the common defense, which none of which we are involved with. But the next point, the second to last one, is to promote the general welfare and also to secure the blessings of liberty for all. But to promote the general welfare for all of the individuals living at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local community level. This is the role of all governments, and this is where we really come into it. So to the municipality is going to be involved with duty of care. And in tort law, we define this as the obligation of that is imposed on an individual requiring adherence to some standard of reasonable care. Now, reasonable care is going to be defined, and it's defined by the courts. Oftentimes, if you've ever had the opportunity to serve on a jury or to act as an expert witness before a jury, as I have, you will define reasonable care as a member of the court, not as the expert witness, but it's the courts that define what reasonable care is. And it's an argument to convince the jury, to convince the judge that you or the party that you're working with has exercised what was reasonable. So what is reasonable for us? We look at standard of care. What is an industry accepted practice? So do we as arborists have an obligation in order to take down those trees that pose an undue risk? Absolutely. So if you have violated reasonable care, you have not exercised the standard of care. Now this is defined, or the examples of this are defined in a lot of our publications that are put out by ISA and ASCA and other groups that we may be working with. So if you have violated the standard of care, you're guilty of negligence. And if it's really, really bad negligence, it's defined as gross negligence. And you may be held liable for that. So in tort law, we want to worry about the civil wrongs that are done against a claimant. People are killed by trees failing. They will always be killed at some level by trees failing. Nothing that we do in our daily lives is totally free of risk. And that's one. If you ever get called in to defend yourself or to defend another individual acting as an expert witness for that side, you need to define the term of risk. And risk is the likelihood of something happening times the consequences. And there's risk in everything we do. A certain number of people are killed every day or every week just by the act of getting out of bed in the morning. I'm not sure exactly what the causes are. Perhaps it's too much celebration the night before. Perhaps it's just an accidental trip and getting tangled up in the sheets, or stumbling, being groggy as they get out. But this is something that we need to define. Statisticians work with risk assessors, and they have calculated a lot of these different risks. So the greatest risk that we have is actually driving a car. For most of us. And most of us who drive an average number of miles per year, being about 12,000 miles per year, runs a 1 in 3,000 chance of being killed in any given year. That's a significant risk. And yet it's one that we take for granted. We get into the car every morning and drive. So have you done your due diligence? Have you exercised reasonable care, care that would be expected of a person or business in protecting others? So these are the yardsticks that we would be measured by when we're looking at this particular activity and working on this. So due diligence is the care that we need to exercise. All municipalities have a due diligence to exercise and keep the municipality safe and provide for the well-being of the citizens. And these are tasks that generally that the citizen cannot do for themselves, or we would like for the citizen not to do for themselves. So municipalities have a role in public safety, in providing for the health. As a result, we're all being required to wear a face mask in certain situations. We all expect the garbage man to show up on a certain day every week in order to take away the garbage. This is something that we cannot do very well as an individual. So the city does it very well. And it provides for the well-being. It gets rid of the garbage. It promotes for the health and the safety and the well-being of the municipality and the citizens within it. So we value TRAQ by providing for safer areas. Now notice the word that I used is safer. It's not safe. There is some level of risk in everything. There's risk in walking down the roads. I personally like to ride a bicycle into work every morning on nice days, and that is one of the most hazardous ways of transportation because you have no crash protection, against an automobile. And motorcycles are equally fun, but also equally dangerous on the roads. So we look at our parks. It's wonderful to get out into a park and to experience nature and to hear the birds, but there is a level of risk. My neighbor texted me earlier this week and said, I just saw a coyote out in the driveway. So there is a level of risk even out there in the middle of the day. So other properties that we may look at will have varying degrees of risk associated with them. And even the riparian areas, the rough areas that you don't expect people to be in, are going to have some level of risk. And this level of risk needs to be defined. And we need to have guidance from our legal professionals in what the level of risk is that's associated with that. So the value of TRAQ is also for professionalism. As I mentioned earlier, it's important as a ladder, as a rung on that ladder of the career advancement. It should be a basis for merit increases. One of the ways that the cities can do this is you, the employee, need to have a little bit of skin in the game. You take the TRAQ program, and when you pass it, we will reimburse you at a certain point in time after that successful passing of the TRAQ program and getting that credential. And so we will then, at that point, pay half or the full amount for the TRAQ program. And it's a guarantee that the city has that the employee has done their due diligence, that they have done the best that you have. It's an investment in retention of the employees when we're out there. So the employee takes a little bit of pride in their promotion of the individual. And so that is something that the city should look at. We, as TRAQ individuals, as tree risk assessment qualified individuals, we don't start out with the TRAQ credential having all of the knowledge. This is like tree care, anything else that we've done. I've had, having a PhD is sort of a double-edged sword. It is a rung on the ladder that I had to obtain in order to move on up. But it is not a sign that you know everything that there is to know. I'm still learning, and I've been at the University of Kentucky for 41 years, and I'm still learning about trees and still experiencing new things. So as a TRAQ individual, you will continue to learn for the whole time period. So this tree that we're looking at in this particular image has it has been trimmed by the utility company. It is asymmetrical. It is weighted towards the road at this particular time. It is located right at the edge of a town, a small rural town out of state for both of us. And in a storm, it has a higher likelihood of failure, particularly in an ice storm. If these pine needles should be loaded up with ice, that tree is going to be extremely heavily weighted towards the road, and it has a high likelihood of failing just as somebody is accelerating, getting right out of town. They've just passed the last house in this particular town. So perhaps the municipal arborists would look at this and say, you know, this is a tree that's located in a curve. I like the tree. It's sort of interesting looking. The lean does not seem to be increasing, but maybe this is a tree that has too high of a risk, particularly being right in that curve that we see. TRAQ is a very valuable tool for public perception. So maybe, and this is something that we should probably suggest to ISA, maybe in addition to having a Tree City USA sign at the entrance and the exit of our municipality, maybe we should have something that says we have tree risk assessors hired as our municipal staff on our municipal employees. So it's a point of pride for the city. It's there to attract new business. And for your municipality, as they try and bring in new business, particularly the clean businesses that are coveted so much. We have a green industry program here. We are looking at public safety. We're looking at trees as being valuable for our city. Not only are we planting trees as part of our Tree City USA and celebrating Arbor Day, we're actually taking care of them and providing for the public safety. And it also helps, in addition to attracting new businesses, to encourage tourism. Tourism is a wonderful industry for a municipality to have, to bring in people from out of state, to bring in people from across your state, to have them leave their hard-earned dollars enjoying your municipality, and then to go home and not add to the extra garbage load to be picked up and the extra traffic at the end of the day. So those are things that are there. Due diligence is a term that we've already talked about, but when it's non-exercised, there is a failure in demonstrating that we have done everything that was reasonable. So if you have not taken down that tree that has been marked, you've not exercised your due diligence. You've not done what should be done. So in looking at cautions for TRAQ individuals, cautions for the managers who are overseeing an urban forestry program, the people who are skilled in TRAQ need to thoroughly understand the level 1, level 2, and level 3 assessment that we do. Each of these has advantages. Each of these has disadvantages, and we need to understand where we would use these and where we need to jump to a higher level of inspection on our trees. We need to thoroughly understand the terminology, inside and out, backwards and forwards, because if you get into defending a tree, defending the decision that was made on a tree, you need to really understand the terminology. Yes, the tree failed. We had a very, very low occupancy rate on this particular trail. I love to go out hiking on the weekends and on vacation times, and I particularly am attracted to trails that I may hike on all day long and not see another individual. That is my idea of heaven. So we need to look at occupancy rates. The tree could fall, and it could, by bad luck, hit that one individual that happens to pass down that trail in that one 24-hour period. So understanding occupancy rates, understanding the potential to fail is something that we need to really understand backwards and forwards. So just as Roy was talking about peer activities and peer review of safety, we need to work in teams as a TRAQ assessment. Maybe you're going to be going out and working as an individual, but bring your new hires in after the fact and hire them and put them out there and say, okay, I've assessed this tree. What do you see? What do you think? What do you feel? What do you sense about this area? Check with others about their work. And I oftentimes say that when I go out and I assess a tree, I talk to the tree and I ponder about the tree and the safety. I discuss it with the tree, and I will debate it with the tree and then later with other individuals, other arborists. So thinking out loud oftentimes is a great way to solidify your thoughts on this particular activity and to deal with this. Re-inspections is the bottom on the tree risk assessment form. That is located at the bottom right-hand corner of the back of the page. It's one of the last things that we do. It says inspections. I like the word re-inspection. So we need to come back in and recommend an inspection after the fact. After we have worked with teams. You assume that the client is going to do nothing in a private setting. So if you recommend removal of that particular tree, you also recommend a re-inspection of that tree. I want this tree I recommend removal, but I'm recommending a re-inspection of the tree if it has not been removed over the next 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, whatever you think is appropriate. So we're going to re-inspect that tree, and we will look again at the occupancy rate. Has this changed? What is the target value? Could I have missed a target in that first inspection? Did I overestimate the occupancy rate for some of the high-risk targets? Look at my risk rating again. And all of this it must be defined in the written policy for the municipality. And it's got to be written down that trees that receive an extreme risk rating will be removed within a certain period of time. Maybe it's 24 hours, 48 hours, but it should be defined. Trees that are deemed for removal and have a high risk rating should be removed within 3 days, a week. All of this is up to the standard policies. We can't remove trees instantaneously as soon as we inspect them. There may even be a policy that it needs for trees to be removed. It has to be re-inspected to get a second opinion on that. So look at these. Record retention is also another caution that I would have for the municipalities, for the managers there. And this is something that is going to be determined by legal counsel. How long do we need to retain our records for these trees that we've inspected? It may be a year, it may be 7 years, it may be in certain areas in perpetuity, forever. So it needs to also be in written policy. And the written policy can be variable between one city and the next city. And it can be variable depending on the assets. There are certain communities in Ohio that have outstanding financial resources. There are other municipalities that are cash-strapped. And so those that are cash-strapped may not be able to come up with the funds to hire the removal of these trees on an immediate basis. The municipalities that have good resources may be able to call in a crew and say, okay, I know it's quitting time, but today we just discovered this tree. It's an extreme risk rating. You cannot go home until you have taken this tree down or at least gotten it into a make-safe condition, and we will be paying you double time or half time, time and a half or double time until you get this tree mitigated. So those are our situations. So when you do condemn a tree, particularly those that are extreme and high risk ratings, it needs to be taken down now. It needs to be taken down as soon as possible. It needs to be in the written policy exactly what the time frame is on this, and to do it immediately. To mark a tree with an X is a good move. But you need to adhere to that written policy. And there have been cases, and I'm sure many of us have heard about these cases, of where trees were marked with the bright yellow or bright red X to be removed, and they weren't. And they fell later and resulted in catastrophic damage to an individual, loss of life. Another caution or an advice to the municipalities is work with a PR program. Tree City USA is a great program. Work with your citizen advocacy groups. You may have tree wardens or tree managers as part of your municipal program. If you have a county extension program which has master gardeners, get them involved with a tree advocacy group. Look at your government officials. It's kind of funny to look out and see all the suits and ties out there, shoveling the soil, and this may be the only real physical work they do all week, but they like the publicity. They need the publicity in order to get support from the community. So on Arbor Day, get a tree out there. You've done the heavy work of getting that hole dug. Give them a shovel that has been spray painted gold with that, and get them to put a shovel full of soil in there. And then later on, you can go back in and get the soil tamped down and firmed down correctly. But getting the citizens involved, getting those individuals photographed, and get the picture in the local paper. Now, in writing reports, one of the great achievements that I like to call attention to, one of the things that I encourage you to work toward, is the ASCA, American Society of Consulting Arborists, the RCA program, the Registered Consulting Arborist. And so the RCA program is actually a level of membership in an organization, but you have to attend the Consulting Academy, and then you have to work on 3 different reports on assessment and writing that up. At the end of every one of these really good reports, you will have assumptions and limitations. And so my assumption and limitation page is going to be about a page long, and if you want a copy of this, you can shoot me an email. You can also look at some of the ASCA publications and get a copy of that, but I'll be glad to share just a boilerplate issue with you. But they state a number of different things, and just briefly, that I, the assessor, have no stake in the assessment. In other words, I've assessed this tree, I've determined that you need to take it down, but I'm not going to make any money off of the removal of this tree. I'm not going to be involved in taking the tree down. And really, a Southern expression is, I don't have a dog in that fight. I don't care whether you take it down or not. My recommendation, my strong encouragement is for that tree to be removed, or for the mitigation activities to take place on that tree. The care has been taken and the assumptions are made that all of the information in there is correct, that is from reliable sources. The report must be taken in its entirety. In other words, you can't nitpick in my report and make assumptions by pulling out one sentence and removing the second half of that sentence that says, but if a cable and brace rod is put into the tree, it will be a much safer tree than otherwise. So we look at the risk assessment rating as being valid at the time of the inspection. In other words, it's not valid anymore once you have gotten the report. Anything could happen that afternoon after I've left the tree. All biological organisms, including trees, do contain defects that we cannot see or detect, even with the most advanced equipment. So there is no warranty, no guarantee. And you express, in my professional opinion, I think or I thought that from the observations that I made. And this is an expression that you oftentimes will need to make in court. In my professional opinion, I thought that the tree had a long time left before it failed. We were not able to detect a cavity on the inside of it, even though it was found once it failed. You cannot be held in the American judicial system as liable, as high a degree of liability, if it's your professional opinion. To say, the thought, that the tree was going to fail was, didn't even occur to me, forgetting about their professional opinion. So remember that expression. And if you want a copy of it, I'll be glad to send a copy to you. So in reality, we need to forget about ostrich syndrome. And so, we can't look at TRAQ as, being a a protect-all. We can't say as city managers, don't tell me about this particular tree and the likelihood of it failing. If you tell me about it, then I'm going to have to take it down, or I'll be held liable for it if you tell me that there is some level of risk. There is risk in everything that we do. In reality, TRAQ is helping us to prevent the worst of the risk. So a final question is, that I've been asked many times as an instructor, is why should I recertify the TRAQ credential? I've been through the TRAQ program. I learned it. I scored 97, 98, 99, perhaps 100 on the TRAQ exam. Why should I recertify? You should definitely certify. This is very, very important because it's also going to bring you up to date on any changes in methodology. The TRAQ qualification is a little easier. You don't have as much time or as much expense that's involved in this. So definitely get involved in requalification on this. If you get into court to defend a decision that was made and opposing counsel comes up to you and says, are you a TRAQ qualified individual? You'll say, I have trained in the TRAQ and I have done I scored a 99 on the test. I scored 100 on the test. Are you currently a TRAQ qualified individual? You're going to have to fess up at that point and say, no, my qualification expired a year ago. And you will have to explain that. So you're not qualified anymore. And you'll have to explain that. Okay. Excuse me. So risk in closing is the likelihood of something happening times the consequences. That is a very important thing to understand. There is risk in everything that we do. There is risk in being killed by a tree, but it is so low that it's almost difficult to calculate for the individual that's out driving down the road. There are many, many other things that are more dangerous. More people are killed by lightning strikes than are actually killed by trees falling in a non-work environment. Okay? And I think we've got a few minutes where we can cover any questions that may have come up.
Thank you, Dr. Fountain. That was a great presentation. So many great points you made in there. What was the thing about lightning?
In lightning, there are about 80 people killed in the United States per year by lightning strikes, many of them on golf courses, many of them playing out at the beach. One of the important things for us as arborists to remember about the risk of lightning is if you hear the thunder, you need to get out of the area. I'll just make a few more cuts. There was an individual, young boy, who was riding his bicycle in Colorado. You can search this out. And he got up onto a little bit of a mound of soil. There was a baseball game going on. He crossed over this mound of soil, and right at the point where he crossed over this little bitty hill, he fell off his bike. When the people came over, he didn't move. When the people came over and looked at him, he was dead. And when they began to do the investigation, it took months, but they found that 10 miles away in the next valley, there was a lightning storm that was going on. And at that exact instant, somebody had looked at their watch. At that exact instant, there was a horizontal lightning strike that went 10 miles over the mountain and came down and hit him at that point and killed him instantly. So the lightning strikes can go quite a distance. And it's something that if you hear the thunder, you need to seek shelter.
So lightning is more dangerous than trees.
Lightning is definitely more dangerous than trees. And driving is the most dangerous thing of all that we generally do.
Well, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much. We will start with questions, but before we do that, I want to just remind everybody to join us next Wednesday for our finale. And also, I want to remind everyone to keep an eye out for today's evaluation in your inbox from Tyler. He is going to include a lot of informational links on the topics that we covered today, and it'll also have a link to the coffee clash that we're planning for September 30th. All right, so Bill, are you ready? There are so many questions.
Okay, we'll try them.
Okay, here we go. Okay, some of them are from Roy, so we will skip the questions for Roy and try to do yours first. So from Matt France, he's made a lot of good points during your talk. He would argue that the TRAQ should be required section of the initial ISA Certified Arborist examination. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I heard a little bit of a click. The TRAQ should be required what?
His argument is that TRAQ should be covered as a part of the, the information that's shared when people initially train to become ISA certified arborists.
Okay, so a good question and a good suggestion. There are questions on risk assessment, the very basic fundamental questions on risk assessment that are now currently being covered in the Certified Arborist exam, and I would expect that I have not seen the most recent copies of the Board Certified Master Arborist exam. Perhaps somebody that's been recently qualified for that can let me know or chime in. But anyway, I suspect that there are more detailed questions on the BCMA exam.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So the next question has to do with making physical improvements, including structural wires, things that we do to trees, and it does that in some way, somehow tell us there is a defect on that tree and actually increase the liability,
okay,
or the potential for injury because you put that guy wire or that.
Okay, so in installing a guy wire, installing a brace rod in a tree does not increase your liability. It shows that you have done your due diligence. Being owned by two dogs, I like to say, use the expression that a city without trees isn't fit for a dog. The trees that have a guy wire in them recognizes that there has been some defect that has been observed, and that we have tried to mitigate that. That we oftentimes sell the trees or the benefit of trees as older trees have more benefits than a young tree. It's great to plant young trees. I strongly encourage it, but we really need to offer our assistance to the older trees because they actually have more value than a middle-aged tree. As long as they're not at the point where they are going to fall down and cause harm. We need to look at occupancy rates. That's very important.
Great answer. Thank you, Dr. Fountain. So here's another one along those lines. What if the village orders the local professionals not to do inspections because of the fear of increasing our liability? And you covered this, but clarify for us.
Okay. So if a local village, a small town, or even a big city orders the arborists, municipal arborists, not to do tree inspections, that puts the city at great risk. By saying the ostrich syndrome, I'm going to bury my head in this sand and pretend that it does not actually exist. And that is not something that is accepted by the laws. The courts have ruled over and over again, ignorance is no excuse. So the next time you get caught driving 80 in a 65-mile-an-hour speed zone, just try telling the policeman, oh, I didn't know that the speed limit was not 80 miles an hour. And
so the old
you get.
Is not allowed. Yeah.
So ignorance is not allowed.
Okay, good answer. All right, so Stevens asks, as a TRAQ municipal employee, what liability am I under personally when the municipality doesn't have a defined tree assessment policy? They do it apparently in this town just by reviewing trees that people complain about.
Okay, so good question. So the municipality needs to have a written policy on the removal of trees and on the condemning of trees, and every one of our street trees will be inspected by a level 1 assessment every 1 year along major arterials, every 5 years along residential streets. And I use those just as examples, for the numbers, but they're not firm numbers. You set your own policy and you stick to it. And if it comes up in court, then you would say, Your Honor, we, the arborists, would love to go out and do a level 3 assessment on every tree in the municipality every single day. But you know what? We just don't have that many arborists. We don't have that many arborists that climb. Climbing is inherently a risky operation to begin with, and there is danger to the individual. So you set your policy, you try and find a middle ground. So the real liability, I feel, as somebody that has come in to other situations as an expert witness, is that the municipality has the risk, not the individual who is working for the municipality. Because, they have been given direction. You will not do this particular type of assessment.
And typically, a shrewd attorney is going to go for the deeper pockets, would be
right.
Which would probably be a city worker.
So
I don't know. I shouldn't be answering questions. Sorry. What would be a reasonable timeline for doing those inspections, either on your back roads or your main thoroughfares? I mean, you said 1 or 5 years, and I feel like, I don't know that a lot of towns have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, so along your major arterials, you would divide these into major arterials, minor arterials, and residential streets, and you would look at the occupancy rate on each of those different streets. The major arterial that handles 50, 70,000 cars a day should have an inspection on a very regular basis for trees that are going to be hanging over into the street that are mature or over mature. If it's young trees, we don't really worry about a 3-inch diameter tree failing and falling into the street. That's not going to be a major factor. So it really depends. It's a sliding scale. Every tree along a major arterial, I think, should be inspected at least once a year with a level 1 inspection, or maybe a light level 2 inspection, where you walk around the whole tree, you look up into the tree. Do I see anything that's really scary in this particular tree? Walk to the next one. So maybe once a year on that. For a residential street, if nobody complains about that particular street tree, maybe once a year somebody ought to be driving every single street on a rotational basis, not all at one time, but on a rotational basis. You drive up and down every single residential street. Now, the community that I live in, Lexington, has a population of about 230,000 people. We have 20,000 miles of roadways, at least that's my understanding from the most recent information that I have. I'm sure that that's higher now, but 20,000 miles of roadways. You can't do that all in 1 year, but doing that over a 5-year period as part of the regular job. As you're going out and doing this particular inspection, drive up and down every one of the residential streets in this particular neighborhood once a year.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, the next question is, when our community leaders don't see the value in educating the workers, what can we do as workers to get them to see the light when they're just looking at their current budget lines?
Okay, so as a faculty member in the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, I don't have the real ability to tell the dean what she is darn well going to do. But if the people who are master gardeners, who are paying their taxes, who are the city officials, the students, they have the ability to say, you know, we need a program in arboriculture and urban forestry. And so that came about. And so we have at the University of Kentucky, we now offer a certificate, a 2-year certificate in arboriculture and urban forestry. And if you are working on a degree in horticulture, a degree in forestry, landscape architecture, you can take as your electives, you can take some of those electives that will get you a certificate in that particular program. So, you know, that's what you can do. We don't have a lot of sway with our boss, but the people that the boss works for does, and those would be the electorate in the particular community. Master gardeners are a wealth of information. My wife is a master gardener, and so she enjoys gardening. She enjoys working, you know, with me, and you know, she, you know, has a little bit of a feedback on that, and is my good harsh critic many times for that. But she can call the mayor up and give advice, whereas the city employee could not.
I think tree commissions can fill that role as well.
Yes.
You know, they can make points that maybe a lower level staff employee couldn't.
Yes, your environmental resources person, the person that handles stormwater runoff, when you get them and talk with them, one of the things I tell my students all the time is, well, you know English. You know English very well. You're taking a course, and I'm only teaching in English. But you know another language that you need to learn? You need to learn the foreign language of engineerese. In other words, how do you talk to an engineer? How do you talk to an environmental risk manager for the city? How do you talk to an attorney? If you talk to an attorney and you say, you know, I don't think we're doing our due diligence. We have not done a reasonable care. We're guilty of gross negligence in these particular situations. Their eyes are going to open up, and they will understand what you're talking about, and that's their language.
Yeah, that is a tough hurdle to break into those other fields and communicate with them, because we are diametrically opposed sometimes in what we're trying to do in those situations.
So when you're talking with your civil engineer about the street trees, he or she, as a civil engineer, is interested in a proctor test for the density of material that would be underneath the roadway, underneath the sidewalk. We're interested in just the opposite of what they are. And so we need to talk with them about the proctor test, which is the bulk density, the compaction level, and say this is not acceptable for growing our trees. If you plant a tree in this particular area, which has been densely compacted, the tree is going to grow for a short period of time and then it's going to fall over. So we need to talk to them about structural soils and load bearing, and those are all terms that they will understand.
Great advice. Thank you. Anything else on that? We got to get our money's worth, Bill.
So any other questions on that?
Yes. Do you have any suggestions for getting, oh wait, no, we already did that one. No, it's, okay, yeah, this question is, do you have suggestions for getting our officials to invest in Arborist certification and TRAQ qualification? Should our tree commission push for these?
I definitely think that the tree commission should push push for that. There is a program out of Virginia called Tree Stewards. That's an outgrowth of the Master Gardener program, and so that is another group that if you can work with your county extension agent, can work with your county master gardeners. Master gardeners are like a sponge, and that's been my experience with it. A lot of the master gardeners are people who are retired, who have a little extra time on their hand and are now taking up the hobby of gardening. So what is a paying profession for us is the information that they are hungry for. They're just like a sponge, and if you go in to give them an hour program, they're going to keep you for 2 hours for the questions. And then they are people who are generally well experienced in life. They have life experiences. The master gardeners are generally professional people, and so they have the contacts with the mayor. They have the contacts with the city finance officer, and they will have no hesitation generally in calling up the county attorney and say, you need to get this person to become a certified arborist because it will reduce our liability. Here's an example from an adjoining community where there was a tree failure. And there are several attorneys that deal with tree failures and environmental law. So they can help you and provide cases. So by the grace of God, we have dodged the bullet time and time again. We're not going to be able to do this forever. Okay.
Yeah. Well, great answers, and such a great job on such an important topic in our field. I believe that we have answered all the questions. If anyone has any burning questions, you got to type them in quick here.
And I have put my email address up here on the last frame. I think everybody still sees this one. Do they? Yeah. So the email address is up there, bill.fountain@uky.edu. If you think of something at 12 o'clock at night, if you wake up in the middle of the night and say, oh, I should have asked Bill this particular question, or if you're too bashful to type it in, send me an email. I'll be glad to get that back to you.
Well, thank you so much. Such a delight to have you a part of this. You and Roy both. What a great afternoon. So with that, I think we'll release everybody. They're free to go on and get on with their day, catch up with everything they put off for these 2 hours. We're better for having gotten to hear you both today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ann, and everybody else that helped to make this possible.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Do you want me to stay on, Ann, or?